of the hardest things to learn as you get older is not everybody deserves full access to you. And I don't mean that in a cold way. And I don't mean you should be closed off or act like nobody matters. I just think life eventually teaches you that access to you should mean something. Your time should mean something, your energy, your space, your emotional space. Because honestly, some people only know how to handle certain versions of you, especially the version that overextends, the version that's always saying yes, that's always available, the version that keeps giving people access even when it's draining. And I think sometimes people confuse being around you with being entitled to you. Just because someone has access to your life doesn't automatically mean they value you properly. And I think that's something a lot of people learn. We learn that the hard way because some people genuinely don't realize how much access they had to you until it changes, until you stop answering every call, until you stop emotionally overextending, until you stop making yourself constantly available. And suddenly the relationship starts to feel different. And I think that's the part that people struggle with sometimes, realizing that some relationships were only functioning well when you were constantly overextending yourself, when you were constantly available, constantly understanding, constantly sacrificing your own comfort. I think it's funny how some people say, you changed when really you just started to chill. And honestly, I think disappointment changes people. Emotional exhaustion, it changes people. Being overlooked, that changes a person. Being there for people who weren't really there for you, that changes you. Not necessarily into like a bitter person, but definitely into a more aware person. And I think awareness changes how openly you move because after you start realizing that you start protecting your peace and being selfish, because constantly draining yourself for other people, eventually it catches up to you emotionally. And I think a lot of people normalize that exhaustion for just way too long, especially for people who naturally care. I think when you're younger, and now I don't get me wrong, I some people are naturally aware of how energy affects them. But I think when you're younger or have less life experiences, a lot of times access feels connected to love. Like if you care about somebody, you should always be available, always understanding, always emotionally present. But that mindset can become exhausting if there's no balance. You can care about someone and still choose not to answer them later. I used to think that caring meant total availability. Now I know it requires boundaries. And I think boundaries, reveal relationship dynamics really fast because healthy people usually respect them. Maybe not perfectly, but they respect them. They understand that you're still a person. You still need your space, you get tired, and you deserve peace. But some people only feel comfortable when they have no limits, no boundaries, no space to be yourself. And honestly, that says more about the dynamic than people realize. Not everybody misses you. Sometimes they miss the access that they had to you. And those are two different things because genuine connection usually it respects limits. It doesn't only feel comfortable when you're overextending yourself. I think emotional access is something people should handle very carefully because vulnerability is real. Trust is real. Being emotionally available takes energy. And everybody doesn't deserve unlimited access to that version of you. They just don't, especially if they constantly mishandle it or only show up when it benefits them or only feel close when you're doing too much. You know, I I don't think developing boundaries means you're becoming cold. I think they're about becoming aware, aware of what drains you, aware of who respects your peace, aware of where your energy feels safe. And honestly, I think maturity changes who you allow close, not out of bitterness or, but out of understanding, because not everyone deserves full access to you. And that's just how I feel about it.